Right. So last time we started looking at the basics of Python programming, and basically I covered the installation and also use the basic functions. So let me briefly go through what we have done and then let's start. So we look at the basics in Python. We discussed the importance of use of Python programming language, why it is number one for some time now and quite popular even with non-programmers. Then they started even start programming with Python because of the easiness and with the extensive libraries, you can implement anything. You can in for example, starting from web applications to mobile to even the data or dashboards. Right. With that said, we look at the difference between the two modes: script mode, where you can save it as a file, and interactive mode, where you can just type the command, get the answer. That part we have covered. And the first function we look at after print is the help function. For example, if you want to get the help how to use print function, then we can simply use help print. One recommended way of using, because sometimes there are some minor changes between the different version of the Python. So you better check it, the help function, if you need exact answers. Then we were looking at how to represent things inside the computer, use of numbers in various different formats, as well as messages as strings. We discussed that if you just use the number as it is, then without any decimal points, then it will take as integer values, which means whole numbers. If you use the number with a decimal point, as soon as you use the decimal point, Python will take it as a floating point number. Of course, it also supports complex numbers as well. Then we looked at use of type, and this is the place where we have stopped last time. Given a number, I told you, depending on the way we represent changes, and then we can check with the type function how Python actually takes it. So you can see we have the same number given in the different formats in Python, and then Python will output the type of. Very, very important. And then the last point that I have discussed is the use of commas, because comma has a special meaning. So therefore, you should not use commas to represent numbers if you're using this. Right. So that's what we have discussed. So let's start. Okay, the very first thing I'm going to discuss is use of strings in Python. You can represent using two techniques. You can use either single quotes or double quotes. Again, this is how you can represent strings. So why there are like two ways of representing? Because sometimes these representation could be part of the strings. So for example, if you say, what's your name? And if you use single quotes, Python confuses. For example, as I told you earlier, you can use print hello world using single quotes like this, right? Which will print the message hello world, or you can use double quotes. Perfectly all right. You can decide which one you prefer. So there's nothing prevents you using any of these represent, but don't mix it, right? But if you try to print something like that, what's your name, as you can see, right? Python confuses, and then you will get an error message, right? So therefore, if the single quote is a part of the string, so you better use double quotes. So I hope you understand that part. Of course, if you're using multiple lines, so then you better use triple single quotes or double quotes. Remember, there's a preference when it comes to documentation. So if you're using the documentation, for example, you better use triple double quotes. So for example, let's say I want to print the university address. Let's say University of Peradeniya. And if you, as soon as you press enter, you get an error because single quote or double quotes can be used for single lines. If you need multiple lines, you better use, yes, either triple single quotes. I will press enter. I can notice that I'll be using like 3 single quotes here or triple double quotes. Right? So I hope you have noted that one as well. So we discuss how to represent strings in Python. Okay, small question for you. So if you're using a print statement and if you want to print what's your name, we have to use double quotes, right? So this is the thing we have discussed because single quotes is part of the part of the string, right? So you better use double quotes. What about the second one? So you can notice that in this particular case, we have to use double quotes. So therefore, since we have double quotes, we have to start with the single quote. Right? So in this way, what you notice is we print the message with double quotes. To that, we cover with single quotes. Right. With that said, let's move to the next part. The next topic, in any programming language, we want to work with things that change during the program execution. So for that, we have to use variables where we store spaces in the memory and the variable names can be used as identifiers, right? So when you want to name the variables, we have to follow some rules. So here are the rules. The first one is the first character of the variable name should be a letter or the special symbol underscore. And after the first character, you can have letters, underscores, or digits, right? So those are the rules you do remember. And the other thing you should remember is whatever the names you are going to use, they are case sensitive. So when we say case sensitive, it means that if you type everything in simple letters, like my name in this particular case, my name, and if you make it a capital N in the middle, Python will treat these two as different. Okay, so let's look at some valid identifiers. The variable names, you can use I. It's valid, although it's a single character, of course, there's nothing wrong in here. Okay, we have underscore, underscore, my underscore name. So you start with underscore. So there's nothing wrong in this one as well. It's good. Name underscore 23. Again, start with the letter and the remaining is letters, underscores, and numbers. No issue. Last one is also the same. Okay, but let's look at some issues with namings. So if you have spaces like here are two things, okay, Python will give you an error and similar to the second one as well. Okay, what about the third one? You can see there's a dash in between. Dashes are not allowed. And finally, any quotes, single quotes, double quotes, again, you are not allowed to use. Right, now let's look at another example where we discuss. So in this particular case, you will see, right? Some assignments. I will come to assignments in a minute, but before that, in right hand side you have some variables. The left hand side you have some values. We are trying to assign them. We are trying to store them. And what are the issues? Let's look at the first one. What is the issue, right? If you type whatever, okay, I'm going to use this. So what we are trying to do here is we are creating a variable name. We are trying to store this value. The problem is this is violating rules, right? So if you try to enter this, you will get error message invalid because this is not following the rules we have discussed. What about the second one? Let's type. You see the dollar is a special character and it is not allowed as a variable name. So second one is also incorrect, right? From the knowledge that we have gained so far, what do you think about the third one? Okay, so we have observed that in this particular case, we have an issue because of the letter dollar. It is not allowed according to the rules that we have discussed, right? So let's move to the next one. So we have class and we have the name PIS. Looks good, but you will see that this is not correct. There's a syntax error. Actually, the reason for this one is the variable name. You cannot use it, right? The reason for this is in Python, these keywords, some of the words are called reserved words. So whenever we write Python programs, Python scripts, these are the words we will use, and these are known as keywords. Remember, you cannot use any of these as variable names. Please note that most of the keywords are lowercase letters except these first three: false, none, and true. Make a note the first letter is capital. So which means that you may not use this. On the other hand, since Python is case sensitive, you cannot use class with simple letters, but if you make it capital C, then you may allowed to use it. So keep this in mind as well. So the summary of the slide is there are some words reserved. They are called keywords, which we use to develop Python script, and you cannot use them as identifiers. Okay, let's move to the next one then. Okay, this is what I want to discuss about the assignment. Basically, in the assignment statement, it will create a new variable and then you provide the value. Ideally, you will have two parts. You have a variable and the equal sign, and then you will have expressions. So expression here, you can have numbers, meaning constants. You can have another variable, or even you can have expressions. Okay, so let's look at this. Right, I'm going to start with the first one. So we say A equals 10. What happens here in the memory, it will store the space to store integer value. So 10 is a whole number, which is Python will get it as int. So, and the variable name we give as A. So the next one we say B is also A, which means in this particular case, it will not create a new variables as per se, but what happens, it will be the variable B indicating the memory locations of A, same place. So therefore, B is also 10. So you can simply type print and a variable, you can see it's 10. Similarly, if you type print B, you will also see the same, right? Of course, you can get some reference here. So if you say ID A, you will get a number. ID B, you get a number, which is the same, which indicates that the memory locations that the value stores are the same. Okay, last one. When you say C equals A plus B, so what happens here? So we have a variable A, the value is 10. B is also, we have stored with 10. So A plus B, that is 10 plus 10, that is 20. 20 will be stored under variable C. So if you say print C, now you should see this will print 20. Right, this is very, very interesting, right? Because assignment, you will have left-hand side the variable, right-hand side the expressions. So what about this one? Now we know A is, you can just simply press enter, it's A. So what about now? If you say A plus 1, according to mathematics, this is not a correct statement. You cannot say A is equal to A plus 1. But in computing, what this means is, the expression is A plus 1. Whatever the A right now, you are adding 1, then you are making a reassignment, which means currently A is 10. So 10 plus 1, the right-hand side becomes 11, and the 11 will be stored under A. So now when you say print A, you will notice it's 11. Let's apply the same transformation. Now A becomes 12. Yes, you will notice that when you say A equals A plus 1, you get the whatever the current value and increase by 1. So that's what it means. Okay, so I hope now you understand the assignment statement. Let's move to the next one then. Right, couple of ideas let's look at. So in this particular case, you will notice that we are creating a variable called greeting. So we'll say greeting, and then we are assigning a string value, right? So we say string hello world. So what happens if you say print greeting? So it should print the greeting message. If you check type, you can say print type greeting. So this will give us the type of this. So you can see that it will give us, okay, it's a string class. Right, okay. So similarly, let's look at the other ones as well. So let me say another statement. We have n equals 70. What happens? We create a space in the memory to store an integer value that is 17, and that is referred as n. So when you say print in, we know that it will print 17, and if you say type in, basically it will give us, it is taken as a in class. Last one, let's have pi value, and let's say print pi, you will get whatever the value stored. It's a floating point number, so ideally we should get float, right? So if you say type pi, so it will tell us it's a floating point number. Right. Okay, with this we have discussed about how to use Python assignment statements. Right. Let me move to the next one. Statements. So as you can see, we can create expressions, you can add numbers, you can add variables, even you can call functions. So these are all statements in Python. If you want to perform simple calculations, of course, you can use the command prompt and you can see the outcome, which means that you can use this as a calculator. But we know that now we have A and B. So we have A is 13 and B is 10. So let's say A plus B, it becomes 13 plus 10, it becomes 23. The last one is a function call, we call it. So you will have the word hello, and then we have a len. So what it does. So if you really don't know what it does, basically you should first check the help, right? So you can type, okay, I'm going to remove this. I will say print len. So this is, sorry, not print, it should be help len. So what help does, basically, it will give you the help for function len. And when you read it, you will see that, okay, this will return the number of items in a container. Okay, what do you mean by this is, in this particular case, we are using a string. String is sequence of characters. So when you say len hello, so basically it will count number of characters inside this string. And of course, we know that we have 5 characters. Right. So I hope that you are familiar with this part as well. We discuss about adding constant values, adding variables, and even calling functions. Right. Now let's move on to the very interesting part of the programming, use of operators. Now we need to perform different things. Now, for example, let's say you are going to work on mathematics, you want to perform some mathematical calculations. So for that, you have to use various different operands. So we are going to discuss various different operators and the operands, right? So the basic one we are going to discuss called arithmetic operators like adding, multiplying, dividing, and so on. So let's start with that part. So here are the symbols you should be familiar with. The first one for addition, right? So we have the plus we use here for adding, subtraction, multiplication, asterisk. Then we have a forward slash for division, double asterisk for exponentiation, which means power. Then 2, we have forward slashes, which indicates integer division, right? Or we can say flow value. The proper word for this one should be flow value. I'll make that correction here. And then we use the modular division. Okay, now that we have this, use this, let me show you in Python the outcome of this. There are a few things that you need to note. Okay, let me take 2 numbers. Let me take 10 and 3, which we call operands. So if you say 10 plus 3, we know what happens. It becomes 13. 10 minus 3 subtracts 10 into 3, 10 by 3, that is 30 multiplication. 10 divided by 3. Okay, so this is division. Remember, the division is always output a floating point value. And remember, note, if you're wondering, this is not the accurate value, but the reason for this is the limitation of the storing numbers inside the computers. So usually we will have a fixed number of bits. So therefore, we may not be able to store all the numbers in very accurately, right? So you have to be very careful of this type of a representation. Right. Let's move on. Then 10 exponentiation 3. This means 10 to the power 3, which is 1000. That is 10 into 10 into 10. Then integer division. Oh, I told you this is a flow value. So you will get only the decimal part of this. Right. You take the decimal part of this. Last one we call modular division or the remainder. So what it means, we have 10 divided by 3, the remainder. The remainder is, yes, it will be 1. Right, that's the first part. Of course, when you work in mathematics, you know that there's an order of operations. The same goes with the computing as well. So we have to think about their order of execution as well. So ideally, we use parentheses, exponentiation as the highest precedence. Then you have multiplication and divisions, the additions and subtractions, right? So Depending on what comes first, you are going to decide how it executes, right? So for example, if you have 10 plus 3 into 2, so you don't normally make the addition first and then multiplication. So you do the multiplication and the addition. So that's what I mean by here. So in this particular case, we get 16. But when you have like same precedence, right? Of course, the order is not specified, but you can normally go from left to right. That means you can multiply 10 by 3, then divide by 2. 10 by 3 is 30, divide by 2, 15. But remember, there's a division. If there's a division, ideally we get it as a floating point value, right? Similarly, addition and subtraction, you have the same precedence. But you have to be very careful about the exponentiation, right? So for example, 2 into 3, sorry, like this. 2 into 3. Into 2. So if you put it like this, what it means is the order of operation, it's very, very important, right? So actually, if you have the same precedence like this, it goes from right to left, not to left to right. Like in this particular case, I told you, usually you go with multiplying first, that is 30, divide by 2, you get 50. But when you have an exponentiation, it goes from right to left. So first of all, 3 to the power 2, that is 9. And 2 to the power 9, you will get 500. Of course, if you want to do this early, then you have to use parentheses, which you are going to change precedence. So in this particular case, 2 to the power 3, that is 8. 8 to the power 2, that is 64. Right? So the parentheses we already know. Whenever you want to make the change of the precedence, you can use the brackets. So make a note of this. Right. Small work for you. So let's start. Now, in this part, we are going to talk about the operation on strings. Now, so far, what we have used earlier is with the numbers, but can we perform arithmetic operations with strings? Ideally, if you check this, you can't use any arithmetic operations except for two cases, right? So I'm going to discuss that part. So here you can notice we have the number 15, but it's represented as a string value. So if you have something like this, actually, of course, you can't use. And Python will complain saying that this is not supported. One is string, the other one is int. You cannot use, subtracted here, right? So it's the same for other cases as well. You can try this, but except for two cases. The two cases are if you have two string values. So here I will take the same example given in the note, right? So you have. So what happens is basically in this particular case, we use a plus, but we say this particular operation is called string concatenation. So remember that when you have two strings and you have an addition operation, so what it means, it's basically glue the two strings together, right? So that means if we have two numbers like this, right? And what you expect is actually these two will be glued together so that you will get, the number 1020 because it's glued the two numbers together. The next operation is if you have a string and if you have an integer value like this, so this will repeat. So in this particular case, you will see this value repeats. So this is a very interesting and early days when you draw, graphics, this is exactly what we have used. Simply you can use a dash line like this. And if you use an underscore and if you multiply by 30, of course, you will get a solid line, right? Okay, so that's about the operation on string. So what to, summary of this slide, basically you cannot perform operation on strings, but there are two exceptions. One is if you are adding two strings together, it's called concatenation, it will be glued together. Second one is if you have a string with the integer value, it repeat exactly number of times specified in the integer value. Next is, okay, we need to use converter functions, right? Type conversions. What I mean by this is basically if you have, data types, sometimes we need to convert in between. For example, let me start with the first one. So in the first one, you will observe that we have a float number 3.14, but we are trying to convert it to integer value. So this is possible. Simply Python can discard the values after decimal point, and simply it can output the integer value of this. But remember that this will not round off. So if you have number like this, you might think that this will be round off. No, still it will gives us the integer part of this. Similarly, if the values are directly convertible, then you can convert. For example, if you have float, let's say 3.14, this is okay. This is all right, but remember, if you try to get the integer out of this is not possible, right? So therefore, you have to be very careful about what is possible, but these functions, int, float, string can be used to convert a data type into another data type. So for example, if you use string str and then if you say 3.14, it will convert to the string value. So vice like that. But if you have uncompatible ones, like if you have 23 bottles and if you are thinking that this will be convert into int, no, it won't happen because it's not directly convertible. So you can practice these and understand how the type conversion function works. So this part, we are going to look at how to take input from the user. So the function that we are going to use for this part is an input function. So let me start with the simple input. So if you type input, and if you use input functions without anything like this, you will notice that this will not go to the next shell prompt and it's blinking. It's waiting for user input. So let me type my name. So if I type my name, what happens? Python will accept it. And you can notice that Python actually accepts it as a string value. So very important that you know this one, because many of the time in mathematics, we are going to work with the numbers, right? So knowing that this is very, very important, note that input, whatever we enters, takes as string value. For example, let me put 10. Yes, it takes as a 10, but as a string value, very important. But we don't know what to type. So ideally, if you want to know, we want to use whatever you want to type to display to the user. So for example, if you want to enter name, please enter your name. So if you put a message like this within the input, so what happens? So this will, prompt to the user. So next time when you use input and within that, if you put a string value, so when you execute, you exactly see that message. Okay, now we know what to enter. Okay, I had to type my name, so it will be the same. So this is the simplest use. But if you want to use it to manipulate later on in the program, then you better save it with a variable. So therefore, what I can do is I can modify my previous input. Let me say n. And what happens in this particular case, basically I am going to get the user's name and then store it as variable in, right? So you can see here, I can type my name, but this time there's no output because it's stored inside it. So we can say print in like this. Or you can say with a message like this, I can say, okay, hello, and I can say it. Yes. So you can see uh, in this statement, when I say n equals input, and within that, whatever the message that you want to, send it to the user, right? And whatever user enters will be stored as n. Of course, if you take type in, we know that it's string value, right? Good. But then again, if you need a number, so you have to be very careful. So if you are going to use a number, so what you need to do is you have to convert into integer value or float. If you want to use a float, then convert it to float value. So like this, let's say I want to get an integer from the user. So I'm going to use like this, I will say int input and whatever you want to show to the user. So in this particular case, what happens when you press 10, what happens? You take the input, it will convert into integer value and is stored in 10 in. So therefore, when you say print in, you see it as a number. And when you say type in, it will be value. So make a note of this. Whenever you need a number, depending on whether the number you need it as an integer value or a float, then use the appropriate.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
So we can only see your screen.
Okay, let me share both. Sorry about this. So the part I have been explaining is the input function. So when I just type input, usually expected input from the user. So when I say Sampath, what happens? You go to the next prompt and then you can see I used Sampath and Python will take it as a string value. So similarly, if you use input and if you enter a number, it will be also the same. Take it as a string value. But if you want to say what exactly you want, what user wants to input, then you have to put a message. So you have to say, please enter your name. So if you put a message like this, what happens? Now that particular message will be displayed to the user. Now user know what to type, right? And further, if you want to further manipulate this, the best way would be you store in a variable. So in this particular case, now we have a complete input statement. You request the name from the user and you store under variable name. So, sorry, variable in. So when you use that, you will not see any outcome. So instead, it is stored under variable in. So if you say print in, now we know it's Sampath. If you say print the type of in, so it's a string value. So remember, if you are using input statement to get input from the user, you will get it as a string value. So why this is important, later we discuss. If you need a number, you need to use a converter function. Okay, if you store, then you can further manipulate. So let me explain that one now. So for example, you can instead further manipulate your message. For example, if you use n, see what happens. So we have a hello and n, so which will be a greeting for the user. So you can manipulate and you can show the updated one. Okay, so let's go to the next one. If you need a number now, we know that, okay, you better convert it. So therefore, the best way would be like this. So let's say I'm going to store the number as variable in. So I have to use input together with the converter function and whatever the message. Right. So what happened in this case? Enter a number will be displayed to the user and whatever user enters will be a string value, will be converted to int, right? So if you use, for example, 10, we know print 10 will print 10, right? And if you print the type, because remember type function will tell us how Python takes it, it takes as a int. But you have to be very careful because it depends on what number user enters. Now, for example, if user enters 3.999, you know what will happen. Because it's trying to convert, because it's a string value. And I told you, you cannot use this. You get an error, right? So you have to be very careful, right? So if you allowing user to enter any number, then maybe you have to, get it as a flow, right? Okay, so that's about the input function. Right. Now that we have looked at input function or getting users input, as the next part, I would like to discuss about output. We already discussed about the print statement and we discuss various ways of output some information. So if you type print help, you can get all the details you need, right? So let me take, for example, help print. So you can see that it says, okay, you can print. This is any number of arguments. We'll discuss this under when we discuss functions. What it means, you can use any number of values to print. We can comma separate. And the last time I also explained the use of how to separate the multiple words, and the default is a space. So what it mean by this is if you say print, let me say hello, and let's say world. So what happens? It's comma separate, right? There will be space. But of course, if you want to use sep and then let's say use asterisk, then you will have an asterisk in between these two words. So you can look at the print statement, help print to get more details. And over the time, I will also explain the other parts in here. Right. With that said, now let's move on to the next part. I'm going to discuss give me a second. Right. Now let me discuss various ways of output messages. For that, we will start with two values. Let's assign A to 28, B to 50. Right. So when you say print A, we know that it will print 28. When you say print A comma B, we know it comma separate. We have two values, 28 and 15. It will be separated by a space. Sorry. And if you want to use other than space, then we can use this and you can specify what you are going to use to separate the two values. So in this particular case, I am going to print the two numbers and in between, I'm going to have a comma. Right. Now, you have to be very careful about mixing values. For example, if you are trying to do something like this will not work. Why? Because A and B are numbers, and then whatever in the middle is a comma is a string values. You cannot, use and you will be getting errors. So there are various ways to get the same outcome, but you have to be very careful about how you manipulate it, right? So I will press enter, but in this particular case, you will get an error. So one way to handle this is maybe you can either convert the integer values to string and then you can perform it, right? Next one is use of blank. To explain this, I'm going to get a new window. So this is what I have used earlier. I hope you remember when you want to write scripts. So what we are trying to do, let's say we are going to print something. Right. Let me save it. We have already saved one program. So let me save this as program number 2. Right. Now, if you run this, let me take this as, okay. So in this particular case, we have the script. Here's my shell. So when I click run module, you will observe that outcome comes right on the shell. Right, now let me type another print statement. In this particular case, let me say Heradini. Right. So if I run, you will observe that I have 2 lines, 2 print statements, and they will print one after the other. But if you need a space in between, there are many techniques you can use. But one technique would be to use print. So if you use just print without anything in between, what we'll see, you will see a black line. Okay, so if you want to get the black line, this is one technique we could use. Right, next one, formatting outputs. So when you want to represent especially the numbers, numbers with decimal places, numbers with some messages, we have to way of formatting our output. So therefore, in this part, we are going to discuss different ways of formatting output formats. We call formatted outputs. So initially, Python uses string modulo operator or mod operator. Then after they have used format method, and nowadays the newest one is fstring. So I'm going to discuss all the 3 so that you have a good understanding about all the 3 techniques. So first part, let me explain the use of string module operator. Now in this part, we are going to use a number together with its formatting information. For example, let's say we have a number and we want to limit it to 2 decimal places. So this is exactly what we are trying to achieve in this part, right? So it's like this. So for example, let's say we have a number. So for example, I can say something like this. I can say, okay, print 10 divided by 3. If you print like this, it will print like several decimal places, but we know that usually we use 2 or 3 decimal places. So let's learn from this how to format it the way we want. Right. As I told you earlier, the syntax is like this. You will have a string value, module operator, and whatever the number, right? Whatever the number, right? So let me start with the number. I'm going to use a number 1,234,56789. So let's take A as a number with 5 decimal places. So if you print A, we know that it will print exactly as it is. Okay, next one. I'm going to say print. Okay, this is the format. You have formatting instruction, module operator, and the number. So this is the formatting that we want to use. Right. If you want to represent this a floating point number, we use single character F here. So this F indicates the format. So if you use F, it will represent as a floating point number. If you use S, it will represent as a string value. If you use D, it will represent as an integer value, and so on, right? So you use single character for this. So let me press enter. So now you can see that, okay, it will represent as the number as it is with additional zero. Okay, so if you want to have a control over the number of decimal places, you can modify this. You can put a decimal point and say how many decimal places you want to keep. So in this particular case, what it means, I need to represent a number as a floating point number with 2 decimal places. So that's what it means. So when I press enter, now you can notice that, okay, originally I had 5 decimal places, is rounded off to 2 decimal places. So originally we have 5, 6, 7, right? So when you round out off to 2 decimal places, it will be 1234.57. So you can change this. If you have 3, this is how it look like. So I think you got the point now. Now the next point. The next point is if you want to decide total number of digits you are going to allocate. Okay, that is the number before the decimal point. So what I mean by this is the number comes before the decimal point. Okay, let me put 7. So this number 7 indicates that how many digits you are allocating to represent this number. So in this particular case, we are allocating 7 digits. Check, calculate 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So which means that depending on how many digits you allocate, the outcome will be different. So what if you allocate 12 digits? You can see that the number is shifted towards the right. Why? Because you have 12 allocated to represent the number. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So you got the point now. So if you have a number before the decimal point, that will indicate the minimum number of digits you allocate to represent the number. In my case, I had said 12. So when I say 12, the number shifted to the right. Okay. Now let me explain how to represent the number together with other messages. Right. Of course, if you want to use a number, right, with other information. So let me take here and I will rerun this. So what happens when here we discuss the number will be limited to 2 decimal places. Similarly, if you take the number and if you want to add some messages, let's say this is about rupees. So if you add that string inside the formatting string, so it will print it as a rupees. So earlier it will print as 1234.57. Now it says rupees 1234. Of course, if you want to have anything in between, before and after, you can put around this. So for example, if it is the price rupees, okay, this is how we modify the text. So this is how we modify the text. Right. Any questions up to this point? Numbers. So let's see how to handle this if you have like more than one value. The first thing is if you have more than one value, you have to specially represent in a different format like this. So you have a formatting instruction, module operate. If you have more than one value, you have to put within brackets like this. So for example, let me have 2 numbers. I have a number stored under variable A. So let me take another value, the pi value. So I have 2 numbers, right? So if you have 2 numbers, you need 2 representations. The simple one would be something like F and F. So this is a simple representation and you can see the numbers. But let's say you want to limit the first number and the second number to decimal places. Okay, we can put it like this. And then you can see A is limited to 2 decimal places. Pi is also limited to 2 decimal places. Okay, I want to make a change. I want to have the first number is limited to 2 decimal places, but the next one decimal place. This is how it look like. If you need anything in between, again, no issue. Like in earlier, you can add anything to the front, the middle, and the end. So let me put something in the middle. Let me say and. Okay, this is how it look like. Okay, just to summarize what we did in this part, we discussed the formatted output using string module operator. So the formatting is you have formatting instruction, mod operator, and then whatever the number. So in this particular case, we are using like two numbers, and here we have two formatting strings. So the first one is limit to 2 decimal places. The second one limit to 1 decimal place. Right. So that's about the use of string module operator. Let's move to the next one. Next technique. So in this technique, we have used the module operator. What is the next thing? The second technique in Python to represent a number the way we want is to use this format. Slightly different from the previous one, you have something called index and the formatting. Let me explain one at a time. So I'm going to take the shell again. Here is my shell. We'll have the same variable, it's A. So if you say print A, it will print as it is. Okay, formatting instructions goes like this. So first of all, it's a string and dot format and whatever the variable. So this is the formatting we use. So not like in early, it will be the string here. This is called the formatting instruction, dot format, and then within bracket, we will list whatever the numbers we want for format. So in our case, we want format A. How? Okay, you can put within the brackets, curly brackets, and you can specify. Together with the colon, how do you represent? So if you say just F, so that indicates that we want to represent number as a floating point number. If you need decimal numbers, it's the same as earlier. You will put a decimal point and say how many decimal points that you want to use. So this one indicates that, okay, I want to restrict the number to 2 decimal places, right? And then if you want to control over the total number of digits that you are allocating, okay, you can put 7 and that indicate the total number of digits you are using. If you need more, yes, you can update and I discuss what happens. The number will be pushed towards the right. Right, I think that's all. Of course, if you need to include some extra information. So let's say this is price rupees and we want to limit to 2 decimal places. So this is how we will use price rupees. And then within that, we will say, okay, within curly brackets, we say, okay, 0.2f, which means it will round off to 2 decimal places. So like this. Okay, so now that we have discussed about the formatted output using format method, so let me discuss the use of multiple values. Use of multiple values are the same. So the first thing that you need to remember is you have a string that is formatted in string, and then you have to comma separate the value. So let me say the same thing like earlier. I will have a and the pi value. So we represent like this. And here we have to have the formatting instruction. Since we have two numbers, we need two formatting instructions, right? We can say, okay, 2 decimal places. Here I can say, okay, 1 decimal place. You can notice how it look like. Of course, we can decide, we can use a AND operator in between. We can say AND. So that part is very same as earlier. The representation is the only one. But there's a small difference. You can switch the order without changing the order under the formatting. So it's like this. We are going to use indexes. The index means it is specify the location. And we use 0 to indicate the first one. So we will say, okay, first number I want to restrict to 2 decimal places. So therefore, the second number will be the index 1. We say, okay, we want to limit to 1 decimal place. Of course, if you want to change this, simply change the index value. Let's say for the second one, if you want to apply 2 decimal places, for the first one, we want to apply 1 decimal place. It goes like this. So it will shift, but then again, it says like how many, right? How many digits that you want to allocate. So we said 2 decimal places and 1 decimal places. And in between, we have additional information. We have an AND. Right. Any questions up to this point? So are we clear up to this point? Any questions? Right. And then I'm going to discuss the last part for today then. The last and the third part of today's formatting is the latest version of use formatting instructions, that is F strings. So this is the newest way of representation, and this is what I want you to use in coming sessions. Whenever you want to print a formatted output, this is the syntax you should be familiar with. Okay, now let me explain the formatting instruction. Now, one of the issue from the earlier one is we use these indexes, 0 and 1, kind of a confusing. So instead of that, what we are trying to use is the same way, something like this. We are going to say, let's say print A, will print everything. So this is the formatting instruction. We use F string. This is what we are going to use. And within that, we are use a curly bracket. It's like in earlier, we have a variable colon and then the formatting instruction. So if I want to represent as F, okay, this is how we can represent. But if you want to represent as, let's say, 2 decimal places, this is how I can represent. If you want to specify the number of digits, then this is how we will represent, right? Additionally, if you want to say, okay, this is price rupees, okay, this is how it look like. And compared to our last discussion, for example, if you want to use, right, 2 numbers, right, then again it's easy. So you can write down within the curly bracket. So like this. So I'm going to say like this, print F string, and we'll represent A like this. Let me say A, 2 decimal places, right? We'll have another number. So you know, can directly type the number 3.141596. So I'm going to say 1F. So ideally, if you understood what this command means, we are trying to select 2 decimal places from A and then 1 decimal places from the pi value. So ideally, this will round off and we'll get this answer. Thanks for sharing your answers. Of course, if you want to have something in between, you can type it. Curly brackets are the numbers. In between, anywhere, you can type anything and it will output as it is. Right, good.